Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Edric, Poon and Company, the podcast where anybody can inspire everybody. I'm Edric, and this week we've got Jolene Lum, the CEO and founder of Urban Tiller Singapore. Urban Tiller is a farm-to-table AgriTech startup delivering fresh vegetables to urban households within 6 to 8 hours from harvest. They source produce that is grown hydroponically, organically, and in an environmentally sustainable way. In short, it's all about bringing you fresh, safe, and sustainable produce. We invited Jolene onto the podcast to dive deeper into sharing the joys of fresh fruit startups, discovering her why, and misconceptions on this thing we call sustainable produce. So let's get on to the podcast. Hey,
Hi.
hi, Jolene.
Hi, Edric. Thanks for having me.
No problem, no problem. Thanks again for taking time off this afternoon to do it. I know you have a very, very busy schedule. In one of the other podcasts that I caught you on, you were running around every day, checking in with all the farms, so on and so forth, and your entire day is just filled with activity.
I think everyone who's running their own business, starting up, it's part of the thrill and part of what you remember, right?
Earlier on in the intro, I was actually mentioning that we do want to really tackle this whole thing about understanding or clearing up the misunderstanding of sustainable produce. But more importantly, maybe you'd like to be able to also share a little bit more about what Urban Tiller Singapore is all about and how everybody, right, can start supporting local a little bit more through Urban Tiller.
Of course, I think this is, a long story, and there's so many elements to our food supply chain, and it's not easy to understand for the average consumer who, in their experience, goes to the wet market, goes to the supermarket, and interacts with food as and when sort of it's available on the shelf, right? And I think for a lot of us living in Singapore, that's usually the case. We don't get to ask further questions beyond what we see on the supermarket shelves. So I think Urban Tiller really brought in a new element of thinking about where your food comes from, how do you be connected to your producers, and understanding what sort of traceability is, and how that factors into sustainability as well. So where would you like me to start?
Well, first off, let's maybe clear the air. Urban Tiller is not considered a grocer, right?
No, so I don't actually run my own farm, but the story is that we do have the expertise of setting up farms. We actually have another operation in Hyderabad, India. So Singapore, we started in September 2020. In Hyderabad, India, we actually partnered up with some of our friends and colleagues who actually are running a farm, and they've already been running about 7 to 9 acres of farmland for the last 3 to 4 years. So there's a lot of expertise in growing, a lot of expertise in sort of ag tech, and knowing how to grow things sustainably in different settings as well. The hope was always to start a farm in every city that Urban Tiller was in. So it's on the horizon in Singapore, but I think we started here without setting up a farm because the time we started really dovetailed and coincided with an abundance and proliferation of other farms in Singapore because of the government push for local food security, and food
Mm.
production in Singapore as well. So it became a very good way for us to start and say, hey, could we just test this value proposition of freshness, and see if we could source from the local farms and really bring something different to the consumers here?
Okay. And when we talk about the pilot over at Hyderabad itself, now I really like to understand when you partner up all the farms over in Singapore, right? How does the pilot story actually tell the farmers here in Singapore that come on to the platform, let Urban Tiller assist you here?
So I think the pilot program is not so much, we didn't intend for it to be a pilot. I think my business partner and I really wanted to learn how to farm. And actually it predates me, it predates before I joined and built the product for Urban Tiller. Urban Tiller in India really started out as a farm. Like we wanted to learn how to farm, how to grow things, grow a wide assortment of things, and then figure out, how does the business model for a farm actually work? And urban or peri-urban farming is something that's come up in the last 10 to 15 years very, very strongly. And I think there's a lot of potential for us to maximize efficiency while doing things sustainably and feeding, a continent that really will have a lot of mouths to feed in a very short while. So in Singapore, I think when I partner up with the farms, there are a few criteria that I have to look at when it comes to the ability to provide that freshness. And this is something that you learn along the way because in the traditional model of how farms interact with their buyers, they may not need to harvest every day. So if you supply to a supermarket, maybe there's a weekly or twice a week offtake, so you harvest when you need to. And in that sense, in the supermarket, they have a warehousing model. Maybe you pass it to a middle person, another distributor, who then sort of decides who it's going to. So freshness is not always part of that equation, and farmers don't worry about that as much, as long as sort of like they harvest the produce and send it to whoever they need to by whenever they need to. So I think what really happened in Singapore was there was a small shift. I think there was a shift in how the farmers were working with us. Some of them had to, rework their sort of time schedule because they had to harvest every morning now for all the days that we deliver. And also understand a little bit more about the arrangement with us, right? Because so traditionally you would imagine that farms growing their own produce would sort of have a harvest and then sort of figure out who to sell it to, supermarkets. And a lot of these models actually work on what I would like to call consignment, right? It's well understood that, okay, if you're a farmer and bringing your produce to the farmer's market, in any context, you would go to the farmer's market and hope that you sell out. But what happens if you bring all your produce there and it doesn't sell out, right? What do you do with it? Especially with super fresh produce, if it's leafy greens, it goes to waste, right? Because it's not as fresh when you want to keep it to sell it the next day. It's just not the same quality. So with supermarkets, that's also the story, right? Consignment models are when you might need to supply 10 to 50 kilograms or more, and you only get paid for what actually gets sold. So I think there's a lot of waste that happens. There's a lot of sort of uncertainty for the farmers. And what Urban Tiller does is we buy sort of the vegetables with as an offtake agreement. I can take it from the farmers and I can say that, hey, you don't have to worry about the selling. You don't have to worry about the distribution. I'll do that part for you so that you can focus on really thinking about growing the assortment, growing the kinds of food that we have, and more sustainable ways of doing things as well.
Mm. Okay, you mentioned the harvest period and also the delivery down to the end consumer directly. What's that time frame that we actually get?
Yeah, so actually, when was the last time you thought about that? When you went to a supermarket, did you ever ask yourself that question?
Well, I've been asking myself that for a while, and I always wonder to myself, how come the vegetables, especially, are starting to wilt in a day or
Mhm.
two? There should be a lot
Yeah.
more life in them, so it makes me wonder.
Yeah. For sure. So, in fact, for produce that you see in the supermarkets, they could have been harvested anywhere between 2 to 14 days before they even get to the supermarket shelves. And it's well known that certain producers or distributors along the way also spray some coatings on your vegetables to make them stay fresher. And this is an artificially induced process, right? And that's because international supply chains are that long. And sometimes it goes through so many middle people, so many distributors before it actually gets to a retail store. And on top of that, I think one of the central urban tiller concerns is that up to 40 to 70% of food waste actually happens along the supply chain before it actually even arrives to the consumer. Be it sort of like human damage, packaging ruptures, everything that happens along the supply chain needs to buffer for that perfect piece of produce that you see on the supermarket shelves. So there's actually a lot of waste that goes in, that is generated as a result of these international supply chains. And Singapore, given that we import more than 90% of our food, that's proportionately a lot of produce that goes to waste and a lot of food that goes to waste.
On your end, I mean, you've done many things. You have okay. First off, you speak German and Italian, right? Uh, you study history, if I'm not wrong.
No,
You are
I graduated with a degree in chemistry and literature.
chemistry and literature.
Yeah,
You're also Red Cross trained as a paramedic.
yeah, when I was studying abroad, yes.
Oh, yeah. So let me ask you something. Out of all these things, then all of a sudden you wake up saying, "Hey, I think I'm gonna like get involved with farming." How does that happen?
No, I think it didn't. It definitely didn't happen in the way that I just woke up and decided to do this. There was a very slow and gradual process, and it was unexpected. In fact, I don't think I would have ended up in this industry if not for COVID. Um, So I had a job. I was doing regional sales and recruitment for a company in the field of corporate education. And then sort of like I had a very keen interest in sustainability. I still had an interest in education. And lo and behold, like a lot of young people who are unhappy with their jobs, I quit my job. And
Mm,
then it was right during COVID. It was the height of COVID when it was about to hit. So by the time I finished serving my notice, my plans to sort of explore this new field of sustainability plans came to a halt. And what I found myself doing was I was a assistant special needs teacher for a short while. And I think that
mm,
was a period in time where, there were so many uncertainties because of COVID, because of the pandemic, but also personal uncertainty in terms of where this was going to lead me. But ultimately, that period was very, very humbling for me because, given all the opportunities that I've had and people that I've met, that period of time working with students with special needs, working with teachers who had been in the special needs sector for a long time, I think it taught me the value of patience and thinking about human potential and how much time you actually needed to put in to something like that. And I think it really recalibrated my goals in life and how I wanted to approach work in my career. So shortly after that, I actually joined another education startup as co-founder. And what that education startup was planning to do was sort of, we realized that there was a huge gap between what young people thought of sustainability and wanting to do good, which is a position I found myself in, versus what we were learning in school. So I think there's a lot of goodwill, there's a lot of good education going on about sustainability. But sort of for most of us who graduate with a degree, and want to come out to do good work, there was a gap in how that could actually be done. So with my education startup, what we were doing was thinking about how can we connect real world industries with young people, people mid career, and thinking about how sort of like they could get a glimpse into the real work that was happening, be it with social impact, sustainability, and CSR, usually a combination of that. When
mm.
I joined in 2020, early on, we were focusing on, of course, food security because it was a huge topic when the pandemic started, lockdown started, and people were panic buying. So I think that was a good moment that we decided, let's have a conversation about food. Let's have a conversation about where our food comes from, and how do we sort of like reconcile where food is coming from in a city like Singapore, and what were the opportunities given that the topic was coming up more and more in the news. So I definitely didn't just wake up into the industry, right? I was spending a lot of time, when we were in that startup. We were organizing a series of programs and reaching out to industry players, including food tech VCs, VCs themselves, startups, farmers, agribusiness, and people who were in the space for a long time. And fortunately, because we were an education startup, the connections that I made, they all had a lot of goodwill when it came to sharing their expertise, and really coming to explain sort of some challenges and opportunities in the industry as well. So that was a good 4 to 6 months of really like understanding the food value chain and the supply chain in Singapore. I wouldn't say it was a very long time, but it got me very interested in some of the central questions. And I met my business partner in that period and decided to come on board and sort of be with this idea, sit with it, and really try to build it up. So I met my business partner, who actually sort of the two of us are part of Renergy. It's a venture studio that works on innovation, and using circular economy principles, we build food, feed, and agri-tech startups. So it's really an ecosystem that we have built, and Urban Tiller is one of them, and it's of course my biggest baby. It's my biggest child. So in that sense, I'm very, very excited about the work that we do, and I think there's so much opportunity in Singapore right now for thinking about sustainability, thinking about circular economy, about food, about agri-tech, even though there's no real pathway for someone who's grown up in Singapore to enter the industry, right? We don't have a very well-known agricultural degree or pathway. So I think it's also at the same time an industry that requires so much multidisciplinary sort of like approach, and problem solving and innovation. So yeah, I feel very lucky and very grateful to have stumbled into this place.
Yeah, it is really cool because what you've done, I mean, on the back end, right? It sounds like it's um, one of those stories that, okay, we'll learn the ropes, we'll get this done, but there has to be something that draws you to this, you know. So
Mm,
my question to you is, if you know, Urban Tiller has the value proposition of fresh, safe, and sustainable, right?
mm.
But in your own words, what does Urban Tiller and Jolene Lum stand for?
I think a lot of it is trying new things. It's really sort of a matter of innovating around a problem that seems so big and so difficult, and trying in a very small way to see if you can push the boundaries when it comes to doing something different and creating real value. I think it's very easy to find yourself in a position where, okay, like you can buy something, sell something, trade something, create monetary value, but I think a lot of it was experiences, right? When I started talking to farmers and people in this industry, one of the first things about food is that it's such an intimate and personal experience. And when I was tasting food on the farms right off the plants, that was something that changed me. I was like, this is an experience that I want to share with someone else. You can't quite buy it off the shelves.
Mm.
Is that an option? Is this something valuable enough that someone else might appreciate it, and it might actually sort of radically change how we understand food and our relationship with food in a city. But ultimately, it comes from, okay, how do I share that joy and that magic of someone tasting something that is, freshly harvested?
One of the things that I noticed that Urban Tiller does is that you're also providing options, new products such as your pestos, and even there's a spicy pistachio
Hot
based
sauce, yeah, there's
yeah, sauce. So
pestos, hot sauce.
mm,
Yeah.
so all these, are these your own creations?
So I think what we were looking for was a unifying theme that would make people excited. And what we identified when we started was, okay, Singaporeans and Asians in general love their spice, but there was a lack of curation. So I was like, could a spicy pesto be the beginning of sort of like storytelling around different kinds of chilies, and then sourcing those chilies and then sort of growing them here, making it fully local. I'm a hothead myself, and when it comes to sort of like looking for different levels of spice, and to tell a story around it,